Hello. Today we're going to look at some approaches that can be used to examine your own teaching. The first activity is going to involve watching or listening to yourself as you teach one of your lessons. Now, as teachers, we all tend to carry an idea of ourselves as a teacher. Our understanding of our teaching self tends to be a positive one, I think, and hopefully it reflects the kind of teacher we really are. But it is difficult to get an objective view of our teaching self, as I discovered when I first started recording some of my own lessons. So we want to consider what we can learn from making an audio or video recording of some of our lessons. First of all, you have to plan for the kind of session that you want to record. Are you going to make one or more audio or video recordings of your lessons? As you'll need to think about the logistics involved. I've generally found that a series of recordings made during a term provide a good variety of information. Let's talk about audio recording first of all. There are many ways of making a recording of a lesson using a computer, a smartphone, or some other audio device. If you can use your laptop, you can download a free, easy-to-use audio editor and recorder for Windows and Mac, such as Audacity, or use the Smart Recorder, which is part of the Smartboard program. If you plan to video recording a lesson, there are a number of ways of making a video recording, including having students video your lessons, perhaps using a smartphone, asking a colleague to make the recording, or using a video recording software with a computer, such as the Smart Recorder. So, secondly, you need to focus on the recording. Do you want to record a whole lesson or simply part of a lesson? Do you wish to focus on particular students or perhaps on the class as a whole? Thirdly, I think it's important to consult your students, explain your purpose to them, and check if they're happy for you to make recordings. Also, I think it's good to rehearse and practice to help the students become comfortable with the recording procedure and not to be distracted or influenced by it. So have a trial run to see if any difficulties arise and to make sure you're recording the kind of information that you're interested in. Then you need to choose what it is you want to record. Decide on the specific focus of the audio or video recording. For example, are you interested in how you communicate the goals of the lesson, or, for example, how you give instructions and feedback, or how you pace the lesson, how you ask and answer questions, or how you establish rapport with the students, perhaps how you use classroom space, or how you use a textbook, how you use procedures for classroom management, how much teacher talk occurs in the lesson, and how actively the students are involved in the lesson. And other questions to consider when listening to or viewing the recording at a later date include such things as, how loudly do I speak? Do I get off track at all? Do I do anything annoying or distracting with my voice, with gestures and postures and so on? How do I use gesture and eye contact to complement my teaching? Perhaps how clear are my instructions for activities, and how clearly do I communicate the big ideas in a lesson? Perhaps are you interested in knowing how effective your interaction is with students and what students are doing as you're speaking? And does the methods and teaching procedures you use seem appropriate for the content and goals you have in mind? Perhaps do you spend too much time talking about things that don't need to be talked about? So, playback. When you listen to or watch the recordings, note both positive aspects of your teaching as well as anything you may wish to change or modify. You might also wish to share the video with a colleague whose judgment and opinions you value, and focus on questions such as these. What do you think are the most positive features of the lesson? Was there anything that you were surprised or puzzled about? Can you suggest any alternatives I could try? Now I want to focus on another activity that involves observing each other's teaching. As teachers, we don't always enjoy having someone observe us. I guess it's a normal reaction, but observing another teacher teaching is a useful way not only of observing the teaching strategies another teacher makes use of, but it can also serve to prompt reflection on your own teaching. It also helps establish the idea of a learning school or a collegial culture, which we sometimes refer to as a community of practice. So now I want to focus on using observation to learn more about teaching rather than to evaluate teaching. So the purpose of observation in this activity is for the observer to watch a lesson and to collect information about the lesson that the teacher being observed would have difficulty collecting herself. So that means your role as an observer is to provide another pair of eyes to watch how the lesson unfolds. So first you need to talk to a teacher whose class you'd like to observe. In return, he or she will observe your class. Clarify that you'll not be evaluating the lesson, but simply collecting information about features that the teacher would like you to focus on. Then, before you schedule a lesson to observe, find out as much as you can about the class you're going to watch. You could ask questions like these. What kind of class is this? Who are the students? What's their level, and do they have a similar ability level? What are their strengths and weaknesses? What teaching materials are being used? And what other resources does the teacher make use of? Are there any problems or difficulties with this class? What teaching approach or teaching style does the teacher make use of? So as an observer, your task is to collect information about features of the lesson, and to do this, you'll need to decide how you'll record your observations. The different ways you could do this. For example, you might make use of a checklist, for example, of different question types to see which question types the teacher used. You might simply carry out a narrative. You simply write your account of the lesson as it unfolds, perhaps making notes against a timeline, 9 a.m., 9:10 a.m., 9:15 a.m., and so on, if the teacher is interested in time management. A seating chart is also useful, in which you check the number of times individual students ask or answer a question during the lesson. So the teacher identifies what they would like you to observe based on the aspects of their teaching that they're most interested in. These could be teacher behaviors, learner behaviors, or both. There should be some aspect of teacher or learner performance and participation that can be readily observed and recorded by the observer, such as the number of times students ask questions, for example, low inference features, and not things that could not be observed but which would depend on making inferences, such as whether the students found the activities useful. That would be a high inference feature. Examples of the sort of thing that you could look for in terms of teacher features would be how much time the teacher spent on different aspects of the lesson, perhaps the types of questions the teacher asked, the way the teacher connected learner or corrected learner errors, and how much time was spent using the textbook. Learner features could include how students participated during a group activity, or the amount of student participation that occurred during the lesson, or perhaps the kinds of pronunciation or other errors made by learners, perhaps also the kinds of questions students asked. After the observation, you should reflect on what you found most interesting about your colleague's lesson and his or her teaching style. How does her teaching compare with the way you typically teach a lesson? Is there something you observed that you would like to try in your classes? So share the information you collected with the teacher and discuss anything that arises from the information you collected. Your role during this process is to be non-judgmental. However, if the teacher asks you, "How did you like my teaching?" you should first comment on what you liked most about the lesson. For example, "I really liked the way you set up the first activity," or "The students really seemed to enjoy the lesson." If the teacher asks for suggestions, if appropriate, you could offer brief and constructive feedback. For example, "I wonder if the task might have worked better as a whole class activity rather than as a group activity." Then you can arrange a time for the teacher to observe your class and follow the same procedures.